They say money reveals who you are, not who you pretend to be. Three men once stood at a crossroads, each with a choice that would shape not only their fortunes, but their very souls. One man chased wealth until it nearly destroyed everything he loved. Another walked away from riches most could only dream of. And the third? He learned that the value of money depends on what you give back through it. These are not stories of greed or glory. They are reflections of the human heart in the face of temptation, sacrifice, and purpose. Because sometimes the most life-changing decisions aren't about how much you have, but what you choose to do when you finally have enough. Today, we'll step into the lives of these three men, each walking a different path, each carrying a different dream, and yet all discovering the same unshakable truth, that real success is not measured in numbers, but in meaning. Their journeys will take us through the power of family, the weight of conscience, and the quiet strength of doing what's right, even when it costs everything. Let's begin with the first man, the one who believed money could buy happiness, until life taught him otherwise. Before we start, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Share your region in the comments, and if stories like this move you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a story that might just change how you see money and life itself. His name was Daniel Hart. Born in a small town with big dreams, he grew up watching his father count every coin before the lights went out. His family never had much, but they had something rare, a bond built on honesty, kindness, and hope. Daniel always promised himself one thing, that one day his parents would never have to worry about money again. By the time he turned 30, Daniel had done what few believed possible. He built a business from the ground up, a small logistics company that grew faster than he could imagine. Every contract, every deal, every late night, it all fed one burning belief, that money was the answer. That if he could earn enough, everything else would fall into place. At first, it worked. His family moved into a larger home, his parents retired early, and the boy who once worried about bills was now the man others envied. But somewhere between the numbers and the noise, Daniel stopped seeing faces, only figures. His business became an empire, but his life quietly hollowed out. The more he earned, the less he felt. Then came the turning point. One afternoon, his accountant called. A major investor wanted in, a deal so big it could double the company's value overnight. But there was a catch. To secure it, Daniel had to lay off nearly half his workers, men and women who had built his company from the beginning. Many were parents, friends, even neighbors from his old street. Daniel sat alone that night in his office, the city lights painting reflections across the glass walls. On one side lay a folder marked Profit Forecast. On the other, a stack of letters, thank you notes from his employees, written years ago when his business first started growing. One line from an old worker caught his eye. You didn't just give us jobs, Daniel, you gave us hope. He felt something shift. 4 years, he had chased wealth as if it were a finish line. But now, staring at those letters, he saw what he had forgotten, that money was never the goal. It was only a tool meant to build, not to break. The next morning, he made his choice. He rejected the deal. Instead of cutting jobs, he restructured his business, shared profits with his team, and opened a foundation to support small local entrepreneurs, people just like him once was. His investors called him foolish. Some partners walked away. But for the first time in years, Daniel felt rich, not in his wallet, but in his heart. Months later, during a company gathering, one of his oldest employees came up to him with tears in her eyes. Her husband had fallen ill, but because of the company's new profit-sharing plan, they could afford his treatment. She said, "You saved us, Daniel. Not your company, you." That night, Daniel looked around at his team, laughing, eating, living without fear, and realized something he wished he had known all along. Money is powerful, but purpose is stronger. Wealth multiplies when it uplifts others. Years later, Daniel's business still stood, smaller than some, but built on values that no market could shake. He never became one of the world's richest men, but he became something rarer, a man who found peace in generosity and strength in compassion. In the quiet of his office, he would sometimes whisper to himself, "Success isn't how much you make. It's how much good you leave behind." And that belief, that success means service, not status, would echo long beyond his years. Because Daniel's story wasn't just about earning money. It was about rediscovering its meaning. Now, as we move to the second man's journey, we'll meet someone who made the opposite choice, a man who walked away from wealth itself in search of something even greater. The second man's name was Amir Rahman. He was the kind of person who saw opportunity where others saw risk. Born into a modest family in Karachi, Amir's childhood was built on dreams bigger than his surroundings. His father ran a small grocery shop, earning just enough to keep food on the table. Amir would often sit beside him, watching his father give extra rice to customers who couldn't afford to pay. When Amir once asked why he did that, his father smiled and said, "Because, son, kindness is a currency that never loses value." Those words stayed with him, though life would test them in ways he could never imagine. By his mid-30s, Amir had become a self-made investor. He wasn't born into wealth. He built it, piece by piece. Real estate, startups, stocks. He studied them all, learning to make his money work for him. Every investment was a calculated step toward freedom. But while success grew, something inside him began to change. His father had passed away, and with him, the simplicity of Amir's old world faded. He was no longer helping others. He was competing. Every deal felt like a battlefield, every win a momentary high. Then came the deal that changed everything. A real estate project worth millions, prime land in the heart of the city. Investors lined up, and Amir stood at the center of it all. But as he reviewed the proposal, he discovered something buried in the fine print. The project would require clearing out a low-income neighborhood, hundreds of families who had nowhere else to go. He tried to ignore it. He told himself it wasn't personal, just business. But one evening, as he drove past the site, he saw children playing outside small, broken houses, houses that would soon be gone. He saw mothers cooking by candlelight, fathers returning home after long shifts. For a moment, he was back in his father's grocery shop, hearing that same quiet voice. Kindness is a currency that never loses value. Amir went home that night and couldn't sleep. The numbers in his head, profit margins, market forecasts, returns, blurred into noise. He realized that if he signed the contract, his name would be written in gold, but at the cost of someone else's home. The next morning, he made his choice. He walked into the boardroom filled with investors, lawyers, and partners, all expecting him to approve the deal. Instead, he placed the folder on the table and said calmly, "I'm out." They stared at him in disbelief. One partner shouted, "You're walking away from millions." Amir nodded. "Maybe I am. But I'm keeping something far more important." He left the project, knowing his reputation might suffer. Some called him naive, others said he'd lost his edge. But Amir didn't care. He used his share of savings to buy part of the land himself, not for profit, but to rebuild that same neighborhood into affordable housing. The return wasn't in numbers, it was in gratitude. Families moved into safe homes. Children went to school. Life began again, stronger than before. Months later, an old man from that community visited him. He said, "You could have taken everything, but instead you gave us back our dignity." Amir smiled, realizing that this, not his portfolio, not his bank account, was the real measure of wealth. He started a new company afterward, one that invested in sustainable, fair projects, ventures that helped both investors and communities grow together. His business didn't skyrocket overnight, but it thrived on trust, respect, and purpose. Years later, when asked what the turning point of his life was, Amir said, "The day I walked away from a fortune to keep my father's words alive." Because for him, money was never the destination, it was the test. a test of who you become when you have the power to choose between profit and principle. And that's the lesson Amir carried with him, that success means nothing if it leaves others behind. That every dollar has a duty, to do good, to build, to heal. As time went on, Amir often visited that same neighborhood, watching families thrive where once there was despair. He would stand quietly, hands in his pockets, smiling at the laughter of children, the sound of a choice that gave life instead of taking it. And in those moments he understood his father's truth completely. Wealth is not about ownership, it's about impact. Because real success is not in how much we earn, but in how much kindness we invest in the world. Now, as we move to the story of the third man, his journey will challenge everything we think we know about loss, destiny, and the true cost of chasing wealth. The third man's name was Jonathan Reed. He was the kind of man who had everything money could buy, and yet, somehow, he had lost the things money could never replace. Jonathan grew up in New York, the son of a schoolteacher and a factory worker. His parents lived simply but taught him values that outshined gold, honesty, humility, and hard work. But Jonathan dreamed beyond simplicity. He wanted success, recognition, and the power that came with it. From his teenage years, he was driven by one conviction: if I can earn enough, I'll never feel small again. He studied finance, graduated top of his class, and quickly rose through the ranks of investment banking. Deals, bonuses, luxury. His life moved at lightning speed. Every year, he earned more, upgraded more, owned more. And yet, the more he achieved, the more distant he became from the people who mattered most: his wife, his young son, his aging parents. He justified it all with one promise: I'm doing this for them. But deep down, he knew he was doing it for himself. The breaking point came one winter evening. He had missed another family dinner, his son's birthday, because a deal worth millions needed his attention. When he finally returned home past midnight, the house was dark except for a single light in his son's room. On the table, he found a handmade card. It read, "Happy birthday to me. Maybe next year, Dad." For the first time in years, Jonathan felt poor, not in his account, but in his soul. The next morning, his company finalized the biggest acquisition of his career. Cameras flashed, reporters asked questions, and everyone congratulated him. But standing there in his expensive suit, he felt hollow. Success had never felt so silent. Days later, tragedy struck. His father passed away unexpectedly. At the funeral, Jonathan listened as people spoke about his father's life, not his income, but his kindness. They told stories of how he helped neighbors, mentored students, and lived with peace. Jonathan realized something heartbreaking. His father had died with far less, but had lived with far more. That night, Jonathan sat in his father's old study. The desk was small, scratched, and worn, but it held a simple envelope addressed to him. Inside was a note: "Son, money can open doors, but only love can keep them open. Use what you have to lift others, not to stand above them." Tears filled his eyes. That was his turning point. Jonathan made a decision few understood. He resigned from his high-paying job and sold most of his luxury possessions. With the money, he started a new company, one dedicated to helping small businesses and single parents grow financially. It wasn't flashy. There were no awards, no magazine covers. But the satisfaction he found was deeper than any bonus check. In the beginning, people doubted him. Old colleagues called him crazy. But Jonathan had finally understood the real game: not to earn endlessly, but to earn meaningfully. His company grew slowly, built on trust and purpose. He trained young entrepreneurs, helped families escape debt, and offered jobs to people who needed a second chance. Every success story reminded him that wealth only has value when it touches other lives. Years later, Jonathan stood on a small stage at a community event. The crowd was full of families whose lives his work had changed. A young man stepped forward and said, "You believed in me when no one else did." Because of you, I was able to start my business and take care of my mother." Jonathan smiled, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: peace. True, quiet, unwavering peace. He realized that money itself was never the enemy. It was the way he had used it that once blinded him. Now it had become his instrument for good, a way to build, to heal, and to serve. Looking back on his life, Jonathan often said, "The greatest investment I ever made wasn't in stocks or companies. It was in people. They gave me a return that never stops growing." And that was his truth. Success is not about how far you rise, but how many you lift along the way. Because in the end, the richest man is not the one with the most wealth, but the one with the most gratitude, compassion, and love. Jonathan's journey closed the circle. 3 men, 3 choices, 3 paths, each revealing that money is not the measure of success, but the mirror of our humanity. As their stories intertwine, they leave us with one enduring message: earn with purpose, spend with conscience, and give with heart, because true wealth is not found in luxury or power. It's found in the lives you touch. In the end, 3 men stood at 3 very different crossroads, each faced with a choice that tested not their wealth, but their hearts. Daniel Hart, the builder, learned that success without compassion is an empty crown. He earned the world's respect when he chose his people over his profits, proving that leadership is not about how much you take, but how much you give. Amir Rahman, the investor, discovered that sometimes the bravest act of business is to walk away. He turned down millions to protect the dignity of strangers and found that integrity pays the kind of dividends no market can measure. And Jonathan Reed, the achiever, realized that the richest moments in life are not the ones spent in luxury, but the ones shared in love. He learned that real wealth is not what you keep in your bank, but what you build in the hearts of others. 3 different men, 3 different choices, yet all found the same truth. Money can change your life, but it should never change your soul. It can open doors, but only character keeps them open. It can build empires, but only love can build a legacy. Each of them discovered that true success is not in owning more, but in becoming more kind, more just, more human. Because wealth without wisdom is noise, but wealth with purpose becomes light. Family, kindness, discipline, and faith, these are the currencies that never lose value. They carry us through every storm, every sacrifice, every triumph. And in the end, when the numbers fade and the applause grows quiet, it is these things that remain. Money can buy comfort, but only wisdom and kindness can buy peace. If this story touched you, take a moment to subscribe and share where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to know which part of their journeys spoke to your heart, because your story, too, might just be the next reminder that true wealth lives within us all.